The White House just dropped a quantum bomb, and it's got a deadline attached. The United States government drastically cut the timeline for American companies, banks, and agencies to dump the encryption that quantum computers will crack like a digital password. We are talking about the security protecting your bank account, government secrets, and corporate infrastructure. Here's the shocker: quantum computers don't exist yet in any meaningful form, but the government treats this like a doomsday clock already ticking. Think of current encryption like a vault with a lock so complicated that even the world's fastest supercomputers would take thousands of years to crack it. That's why your credit card number is safe online. But quantum computers operate on completely different rules. A quantum computer could crack that same lock in hours or minutes. Not because it's stronger, because it plays by a different rulebook entirely. The White House executive order basically says, we can't wait for quantum computers to arrive and break everything. We need to switch to quantum-resistant encryption now. And here's where it gets interesting. The deadline announced is way shorter than anyone expected. Organizations that thought they had years suddenly have months. This isn't theoretical computer science anymore. This is government mandate meets urgent deadline, and nobody's quite ready. So what exactly is quantum vulnerable cryptography? Today's encryption relies on math that's easy to verify but hard to reverse. Imagine a recipe book. Anyone can follow the recipe and bake a cake. But if you're given a finished cake, it's nearly impossible to reverse engineer the exact ingredients and steps. That's the idea behind RSA encryption, the system that protects most of the internet right now. Quantum computers work with quantum bits, or qubits. Unlike regular bits that are either 0 or 1, qubits can be 0 and 1 at the same time. This property, called superposition, lets quantum computers test millions of possibilities simultaneously. Shor's algorithm, developed back in 1994, showed that a sufficiently powerful quantum computer could break RSA encryption in a matter of hours. Decades later, we are still waiting for a quantum computer to reach that capability, but the threat is real. Here's what makes this urgent. Encrypted data collected today could be stored for decades and decrypted once quantum computers arrive. Government secrets, medical records, financial transactions, if it's encrypted with current methods, it's potentially vulnerable to future decryption. That's why the government isn't waiting for quantum computers to exist. Cryptographic experts call this the harvest now, decrypt later threat. So here's how the threat actually works. Imagine you're a bank protecting customer data with state-of-the-art encryption. Your encryption key is 2048 bits long, which takes a classical computer about 300 trillion years to brute force. Sounds safe, right? Well, a quantum computer running Shor's algorithm could theoretically crack that same key in hours or days. The timeline for quantum computers reaching this capability is uncertain. Some experts say we are 10 to 15 years away from a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, the kind that can actually threaten modern encryption. Others think it could be 20 or 30 years. The problem is we don't know for sure, and we definitely can't wait to find out. Every encrypted conversation, every classified document, every financial transaction sent today with current encryption is potentially vulnerable. This is the harvest now. Decrypt later scenario experts worry about. Nation-states and bad actors could be intercepting and storing encrypted communications right now, betting that quantum computers will eventually arrive and unlock everything. A company might not care about today's commercial secret, but what if it's valuable again in 2050? And here's the thing that changes everything: we can't pull back from this. Once your encrypted data is stolen and stored, it's gone. That's why the government is pushing the migration now, not later. Let's talk about who this actually affects. Banks process trillions of dollars in transactions daily. Every single one of those is encrypted. If a quantum computer broke that encryption in 2030 and retrieved data from 2024, banks could have their transaction records exposed. But it's not just money. The Department of Defense, the National Security Agency, the CIA, they're all using current encryption for some of their most sensitive communications. Imagine classified military plans, intelligence reports, weapons specifications, all potentially vulnerable to decryption decades from now. It's not just the United States either. Every nation with sensitive military or government secrets is at risk. Healthcare systems store encrypted patient records with social security numbers, medical histories, genetic information. That data could be accessed by criminals, insurance companies, or foreign governments if quantum computers break the encryption. Corporations protect intellectual property, research, financial data. A tech company's quantum computer breakthrough documents are worthless today, but what if they are still valuable in 2045? And here's where it gets complicated. We don't even know how many organizations are storing sensitive encrypted data right now. The government can't easily inventory what's happening in the private sector. That's why this deadline is so important. Every organization needs to start migrating now, not years from now. The White House didn't just announce a new deadline out of nowhere. There was an older timeline, and it's been dramatically shortened. The previous target for this quantum-safe migration was sometime around 2030 or later, but the new executive order moved that deadline up significantly. We are talking about cutting years off the timeline. Here's the math that makes sense to the government. If a cryptographically relevant quantum computer could arrive in 10 to 15 years, and it takes 5 to 7 years to migrate all critical infrastructure, then you need to start now. You can't start in 2028 when the deadline was 2030. You'll miss it. The new deadline creates a sense of urgency that wasn't there before. Federal agencies have been told to begin migration immediately. Private companies in critical infrastructure like energy, finance, and telecommunications are being pushed to prioritize this. It's not a gentle recommendation, it's a mandate. But here's what makes this tricky. The timeline is still ambitious. Some organizations have complex legacy systems that were built decades ago. Migrating encryption across a bank's entire system, government network, or healthcare infrastructure isn't like flipping a switch. But the order basically says, this is no longer a nice to have for the future. This is urgent national security right now. What does this deadline actually mean for organizations? It's a wake-up call disguised as a policy mandate. Federal agencies have to start upgrading now. Private companies in the critical infrastructure sectors have to prioritize post-quantum cryptography or face regulatory pressure. The technical challenge is enormous. Organizations have to identify every place they're using vulnerable encryption. That could mean thousands of systems. Then they need to migrate to post-quantum algorithms, the new encryption standards that even quantum computers can't break. The National Institute of Standards and Technology has been developing these standards for years, and they're almost finalized. But here's the thing that changes everything. Implementing new cryptography standards across an entire organization takes time, money, and expertise. A bank can't just flip a switch to quantum-safe encryption. They have to test it, integrate it with legacy systems, train staff, and verify that nothing breaks. If something goes wrong, people can't access their bank accounts or make transactions. The deadline essentially means companies can't delay any longer. The government is saying, start this now, not next year, not in 5 years. The transition period is probably going to be chaotic. Some organizations will be ready. Others will scramble. But this is the government's way of making sure we are not caught flat-footed when quantum computers eventually arrive. So what does this mean for you, the regular person? Well, you're not going to implement quantum-resistant encryption yourself, but there are things you should know. First, your passwords are not the same as encryption. Your bank password isn't suddenly at risk because of quantum computers. Banks are working on their encryption, not your password security. What you should do is make sure your own digital security is solid. Use a password manager to create strong, unique passwords for every account. Enable two-factor authentication wherever possible. Keep your devices updated. If a company gets hacked and they used poor encryption, your data could theoretically be exposed. The stronger your individual security practices, the better protected you are. Watch for news from companies and institutions that you do business with. If your bank announces that they're migrating to post-quantum cryptography, that's a good sign. It means they are taking this seriously. If years go by and you haven't heard anything from your bank or your employer, it might be time to ask them about their quantum migration plans. The other thing to understand is that this is a marathon, not a sprint. The government's deadline pushes organizations to start, but the actual migration will take years. You don't need to panic or expect everything to change overnight. But you should understand that somewhere in the background, the whole infrastructure of digital security is being rebuilt for a quantum-resistant future. Here's what all of this means. Quantum computers represent one of the biggest cryptographic challenges the digital world has ever faced. They don't exist yet in a way that threatens current encryption, but the threat is real enough that the government can't wait. The shortened deadline is a recognition that our entire digital infrastructure needs to evolve before quantum computers arrive, not after. The White House order is basically saying, this transition can't wait. Organizations have to start now. It's going to be expensive, complicated, and messy. Some systems will break during migration, but the alternative is worse: waiting until quantum computers arrive and then scrambling to protect decades of potentially decrypted data. This story matters because it's a preview of how governments will handle future technology threats. It shows that cybersecurity doesn't just happen, it requires planning, coordination, and sometimes government mandates to push it forward. The next wave of encryption is coming, whether organizations like it or not. If you found this breakdown helpful, follow for daily AI news. We break down the technology stories that matter to your world, not the hype, just the facts. And subscribe to stay updated on how this quantum transition plays out over the coming months and years.